Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day you're watching this. I hope it finds you well. My name is John, and I'm an author. And what got coming up is me reading the first chapter of my first book, The Shadow of the Past. That is available on Amazon, linked below. Um, this was recorded in two parts, which is why you're going to see my outfit change in the middle of it, and maybe one or two of the voices change as well. But and they were uploaded individually onto YouTube. I hope you enjoyed the reading of chapter one of The Shadow of the Past, deep, unsettling hatred. Thank you and enjoy. All right. Chapter one, a deep, unsettling hatred. The Toranu forest burned as Valinar watched, powerless to move or do anything to stop the slaughter going on around him. Rampaging soldiers armed with weapons, cold and cruel, mauled all that came within their grasp, laughing and grinning at the bloodshed. Some elves were fleeing for their lives, others were trying to defend themselves with little avail as the fires raged on. More and more of the strange warriors charged into Garatha from the surrounding forest, bringing destruction with them. Valinar watched as Theras, his father, was cut down, and Targatha, his elder brother, slew a dozen before finally being overwhelmed. Valinar strained every muscle in his body trying to help, but still he was frozen in place. All the while, above the screaming of the elves and Gairatha crashing down around him, Valinar heard laughter, cruel and mocking from some source other than those destroying the forest. Suddenly he saw before him a woman dressed in robes of deep gold embroidered with many colored designs. Her age and exact features he could not make out, but she was beautiful and had the most piercing eyes he had ever seen. Her head was tilted back and her mouth was opened with apparent joy. The inhuman laughter was coming from her. One of the attackers finally seemed to notice Valinar and made a charge for him, sword held high. Just as it was about to reach him, the world went black. Valinar woke with a start. He sat up and looked around his room in a panic. It took him several minutes to realize that he had been dreaming and was quite safe high among the Etru trees in the city of Gairatha. Valinar got out of bed and went to the basin of water in the corner of the room. He broke the thin layer of ice on the surface and splashed some on his face. The frigid water burned but woke his senses fully, and he gazed at his reflection in the water. His thin face showed no signs of worry over the dark dreams he had just experienced, and he knew something was amiss. He was having such dreams almost every night. He straightened up and walked over to the entrance of the room, pushed aside the curtain with the back of his hand, and ducked slightly to step onto the walkway. It was still night, and, judging by the stars, a few hours before dawn. His eyes darted around Garatha. The city, greatest of the elves of Toranu, stretched in all directions. It was twisted in, around, and between the trees with bridges and ladders connecting various structures. It always reminded Valinar a little of a spider's web. Winter was coming to an end, but there was still a thick layer of frost on everything. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The city's guards, whose main job was keeping animals out of the city, were at their posts, and a few hunters were gathering their gear before heading out into the forest. After taking several breaths of the cold morning air and watching the fog of his breath to calm his nerves, Valinar turned and went back into his room. He grabbed a thick tunic, colored pale brown, and then fastened a green cloak around his neck. He reached for his sword, but decided against it, instead fastening a long hunting knife to his waist, after which he turned and once more departed his room. He made his way quickly along the wooden walkways, expertly weaving his way ever downward, past various dwellings and storerooms that made up the residential area of the city, towards the northwestern gate. He passed the occasional hunter, all of whom acknowledged him with a slight nod of the head, which he did not return. But there were no others about so early. His stride was uninterrupted until his path was blocked by the guards at the gate. Valinar focused his eyes upon the taller of the two guards, who took a step backward, surprised by who he saw facing him. Yersu, forgive me, I mean Lord Valinar. May I ask where you are off to in such a hurry and at such a strange hour? If you must know, Fatai, I find myself unable to sleep, and I am of a mind to have a long walk through the forest in order to clear my head, Valinar replied. Is there some problem with that? Of course not, my lord. It's just, came the guard's stammered reply. He had hoped for an eventful watch. Are you sure it is wise to go out into the forest on your own? There are a lot of dangerous animals about at this time of night. Valinar raised an eyebrow. I am sure I will be fine, he said sarcastically. Beside, I have no intention of heading into the forest's depths. The other guard, who had been shifting uncomfortably, spoke up to this. My lord, you know as well as we do that dangerous animals have been reported wandering further and further out of the deep forest. While I do not doubt that you can take care of yourself, you have only brought a knife for defense. Valinar sighed. Unless either of you actually wishes to prevent me, I respectfully request that you cease to block my path. Both guards stood aside, and Valinar resumed his purposeful walk beyond the city. The taller guard said to him as he passed, My lord, you are the son of the Ha'atha. It is by his wish that we question all those leaving the city on their own. He will not be pleased when he hears that you have defied his will. The comment seemed to have no effect, so the guard shrugged and turned back to the city, commenting to his partner, Yersu will get himself into real trouble someday. Just cannot understand him. To which his partner simply nodded. Valinar walked quickly into the forest with his head down, lost in his own thoughts. He let his instincts take over and, intimately familiar with his surroundings, effortlessly avoided tree root and branch, almost as if they weren't even there. He was also careful to avoid the areas occupied by clusters of huts and the crops they were built to protect and cultivate. The forest was still, and the frost glittered in the waning moonlight which filtered through the trees, lending a gentle glow to the green and brown hues of the trees and plants. The cool night air calmed him enough to revisit in his mind all the dark nightmares he had to see he'd had to see if there was some connection between them, but he could find nothing. He passed several large animals sleeping, but his footfalls were silent, a simple piece of nearly unconscious spell weaving. He would have continued for some time in silent contemplation had it not been for the Ralnar. Its footfalls had been so silent even the sharp ears of most elves would not have heard it, but Valinar had sensed it leap. In one smooth, graceful motion, he jumped and rolled to his right and came back up in a standing position with his knife drawn. The Ralnar, a feline creature with long, sharp claws and teeth, and hard, bristled, almost armored like hair growing from its spine and upper shoulders, landed a few yards in front of Valinar and turned to face him. It appeared to be male, judging by its size, standing 3 feet off the ground on all fours and about 4 feet long. Its color was a deep green. Its short tail lashed in anger as its furious yellow eyes glared at the prey which it had narrowly missed. It sized up the distance for a moment and then leapt again. Valinar agilely sidestepped to the right, spun to his left, and brought the knife up along the Ralnar's body to cut deep into the beast's soft stomach. The beast gave a howl of pain as it landed hard on the ground. Its blood, appearing almost black in the dim light, onto the ground. Its head turned and its furious eyes surveyed Valinar for one long moment before it staggered off into the woods to rest and heal its wounds, or else to die. Valinar knelt and wiped the blood from his knife before returning it to its sheath. That guard had been right. Beasts were coming into the outer parts of the forest more and more. 30 years ago, a Ralnar never would have come so far out, and certainly would not have attacked an armed elf unless starving. Now it was dangerous to wander even the outskirts of the forest unarmed or alone. What was more, Valinar had sensed something in that beast, something he had been feeling everywhere. It was a vile feeling, hidden deep down and festering, which he could not place. It was almost as if the beast was being driven into a rage by some kind of malevolent will. Valinar walked on for some time before coming to a small clearing with a partially frozen stream running through it. Though it was near several small villages, the stream was secluded due to several rocky outcroppings around it. He had found it in his youth, and it had long been his favorite spot for contemplation. He sat down with his back to a tree and, after getting himself into a comfortable position, closed his eyes. As he had done countless times, he slowly looked within himself to the streams of energy flowing through him and all other things on the Terra. This current, or ere, was the raw material for all spell weaving. It had a power beyond any comprehension, but it also bent easily to the will of one with a strong connection to it. So it took little concentration for Valinar to pick apart the ere into its different elemental strands. He felt their familiar ebb and flow, which both flitted about like a small bird and moved in the steady pattern of years. He searched it all carefully for the powerful anger he had felt many times before, but could not find it until he decided to look deeper. It lay beneath the ere, beyond where even he was comfortable delving. So deep, in fact, he could not even sense its nature or origins. He could just sense that it was erratic, far different than the gentle pattern woven by the elements, which he guessed meant that this hatred was not natural. While trying to sense the nature of the rage, he got several brief flashes of the nightmares he had been having. Though he was not sure how, Valinar could only suppose it meant that they were connected. He had been getting prescient visions all his life, but he had no control over when he would have a vision or of what it would show. He was about to continue searching when he sensed a stirring within the area of Earth and recognized the pattern as that of his elder brother. Valinar opened his eyes, and as his mind returned to himself, he felt the early sun on his face and realized he had been sitting for hours. His brother approached and stood next to him. He said and did nothing but gaze at the sunrise. Valinar stood up slowly and turned to his brother. Valinar was taller than his brother and also heavier. Targatha was very thin and possessed a short torso with long, gangly arms and legs, while Valinar, although thin, was quite muscular for an elf with a longer torso and shorter limbs. Valinar looked for a moment into the rich brown eyes of his elder brother. Father sent you to find me. This was not a question, but a statement of fact. Targatha simply smiled at him, saying, "Reading my mind, brother." I don't need to read your mind. That is the face you always wear when you have been sent to locate me. And it is always you that Father sends after me, since you are the only one who knows me well enough to track me when I do not desire to be found, said Valinar, smiling as well. Does he seek me to give punishment for coming out here alone, or is there another purpose for his summons? While it is true that Father is not happy with that you, in spite of the danger, continue to wander the forest alone, it is for another purpose that he desires your swift return, came the reply with a tone of gentle remonstration. He worries about you, we both do, and yet at times you seem to have more concern with these dreams of yours than what your family thinks. Valinar turned his eyes from his brothers to look at the rising sun once more and to hide the look of regret. I appreciate your care, Targatha. I really do. As I have said many times, I do not try to cause trouble, but these dreams are too frequent to be ignored. I do not wish anything to happen to Toronto, to you, or to Father. Targatha sighed. I know, brother, I know. I do not doubt you have had such dreams, but you have not yet offered us any concrete proof that the danger of which you speak is real. That does not mean that it is not out there. Nor does that mean that it is, Targatha reminded his brother. It is noble that you wish to protect us, but you must temper your actions or you will alienate those who you desire to help. In truth, I am surprised Father allowed you to come after me on your own, remarked Valinar, pointedly changing the subject. It was Targatha's turn to look somewhat guilty. It was nearly dawn when I left, and most of the dangerous beasts only hunt at night. But when he commanded that you be found, I told him that I could find you faster on my own and left before he could protest. Well, said Valinar with a chuckle, are you going to tell me what this other purpose is, or is it meant to be surprise? Father wishes you to be present at the council meeting today as we are welcoming a visitor, replied Targatha as the brothers set off through the forest. A visitor? Inquired Valinar. Do you know who the visitor is? The seasonal traders are not due for many days yet, and I know all of the usual envoys. Valinar mused half to himself as he followed his brother's lead through the forest paths. I was told little before I was sent to find you, said the elder elf. All I know is that she has some relation to that union that we have been hearing about in recent years. I also heard mention that she is considered by many to be a prophetess. After a few moments' silence, he went on. If she really does have the ability to read futures, you should be interested in speaking with her, as she is the first person, besides yourself, in at least a generation said to possess such a gift. Valinar made no response to this, but walked in silence for some time. When they got to the place where the Ralnar attacked him, Targatha asked for the full story of what had happened, most of which he had already guessed, and shook his head sadly as Valinar filled in the details. It was a fine morning, and the forest was shaded from the rising sun, with the occasional golden lancet of sunlight piercing through the gaps in the trees. Various bird songs could be heard, though few birds were seen, and many other animals were about, all of them far more docile than the Ralmar. It was mid-morning by the time the brothers reached the northwest gates of Garatha. Different guards were on duty than the ones Valinar had encountered earlier, and both elves inclined their head as the brothers passed, a gesture that was returned in kind by the elder and with a curt nod by the younger. The wooded city was a bustle with all the daily chores of life. The early morning hunters had returned, and the beasts they slew were being skinned near the gate, and the leather artisans were inspecting the hides to see what use could best be made of them. Proceeding up a stair spiraling around an etru, the brothers were passed by a small group of children heading off to lessons. This and many other scenes of life were observed by the brothers as the elves of the city went about their business. As they were crossing a bridge leading to the meeting hall, Valinar happened to glance down at the stable yard and saw a dozen proud-looking sable horses in an excellent bay. Their bridles and saddles were on the ground as they were being attended to by several men. The men were obviously soldiers, judging by the armor they wore and the swords they carried. Each of them bore a tabard of deep purple cloth, at the center of which was a yellow circle with two hands clasped and an eye gazing downward upon the hands within the circle. Valinar paused for a moment to take this in before continuing after his brother, pondering over what that device, that of the Union he presumed, meant and why it troubled him so. At last they came to the council chamber of the city. While most of the buildings of the city had been built in some way in or around the trees, the council chamber was different. A cluster of three mighty etru trees, which had grown unusually close together, had had their tops removed, and the meeting hall was carefully built on top of them. It was large enough to comfortably house more than 100 elves at a time, and was carefully designed and painted to look like the canopy of a single great tree, save for the flags and banners of the various clans that flew from its top. Valinar entered the council chamber and saw that all the clan elders and other important dignitaries were present already, some of them having no doubt traveled for several days to reach Garatha. There were important matters to discuss. Valinar knew that he was only present due to his status as the son of the Ha'atha and because of his study of the lands beyond the forest. It would be hundreds of years before he was counted among the elders of the Taranu elves. Some of the elders were already seated at one of the curved tables which circled the room in three great rings, while others were milling around discussing this and that. Most paid the two new entrants little mind. You should not be so reckless with your lives, my son, said the elf standing at the center of the room. The reason that I wish you not to go beyond the gate on your own is because I care about the safety of both of you. Valinar strode forward and kissed the hand of his father. I know, father, Targatha expressed much the same sentiment, but as you can see, neither of us came to any harm, despite the best intentions of Aralnar in my case. Aralnar, said Theris, looking into his son's eyes. After a moment he sighed. I ask only that you both be more careful. Some day even your skills might not prove to be enough, but we shall discuss that later. For now, be seated so that we may begin. Valinar took his seat at the outermost ring of tables as Theros arose to address the council. Theros was an elf of noble bearing who commanded respect from all those who looked upon him. He was slightly taller than his elder son, and his skin had grown quite bark-like with age. But aside from that, he was almost identical in appearance to Targatha. With his younger son, however, he shared no resemblance. Elders, friends, and honored guests, began the Ha'atha, you have been summoned here today to hear, debate, and decide upon an offer that has been brought by a group of visitors which arrived but this morning. I thank you all for your prompt attendance, as were only made aware of their coming a few days ago. They have been allowed to enter the city and have been given shelter and food. It is their intention on leaving early tomorrow. But first, their leader has a proposal she wishes to put to this council that concerns the future of our people. At this, there was much widespread debate among the members of the council to what this offer could possibly include. After a few moments, they were called to silence by Theras, who said, are we willing to listen to this woman's proposal? Shall I show her in? There was a moment of murmuring of assent from the council, and the Ha'atha moved toward the door behind him and drew aside the curtain and beckoned to someone beyond it. An instant later, a tall woman stepped through the doorway, and the sight of her made Valinar freeze. The woman was taller than he was and had very pale skin with sleek black hair that came down to her waist. She had a well-defined face with a high forehead, strong cheekbones, and thin, pale blue lips. She was not so much beautiful as striking to look upon, especially with the look of superiority she wore upon her face. She wore a floor-length purple robe with blue embroidery that shimmered as she moved, and her hands bore several rings of intricate design. The most shocking thing about her was her eyes, which were a bright and clear yellow and seemed to bore into whatever they were looking at. The woman moved to the center of the room, and not losing the expression of nobility, she bowed as her thin lips curled into a cold smile, revealing pale blue teeth, all of which looked rather sharp to Valinar. Noble elders of the Taranu forest, thank you for hearing my offer, said the woman. Her voice was rich and deep and lyrical, but at one and the same time seemed high and cold. I am Ushara, and I am the chief advisor to Minister Adran, the leader of the Telmaran Union. We are a coalition of realms that seek to build a better and safer life for all the peoples and kingdoms throughout the whole of Sirana. For too long has this terra been divided, and for too long have the divisions led to wars over petty differences. I have long had dark dreams that a calamity is coming to this terra, one that will wash over all lands and all people with oppression and pain. It is with the vision of this dark future in mind that I fostered this union and helped it to grow into a force for good, which I hope will one day encompass all the many kingdoms and peoples of this terra. It is with this in mind that I bring an offer of friendship and alliance to you. By joining us, you would have the aid of our vast resources and great armies, should you need them, and in return you would contribute to the safety and prosperity of this whole terra. This is the offer I bring. Upon finishing her speech, she slowly looked around the room and held each elder's gaze for a few seconds before moving on. None of the elves were capable of returning the piercing gaze of her eyes until she got to Valinar, who returned her cold, staring kind. At the sight of her, Ushara stopped, and for the briefest second her controlled expression became one of bewilderment. But before any save Valinar realized the shift, her face was once more inscrutable. While Valinar was still holding Ushara's gaze, the silence was broken by one of the elders whose clan controlled the southern edge of the forest. What aid could you provide? I do not doubt the strength of your armies, and traders have long reported the vast resources of your lands, but you are as yet far away. Ushara's smile broadened as she turned her attention to the elder. My good elf, we may as yet be distant, but many are flocking to join our cause, or at least join us in friendship. Word alone of your joining the Union would increase the standing and influence of Toronto immediately. As the elder who she had just addressed pondered her response, another, perhaps the oldest in the room, so old in fact that were it not his ability to walk and talk, even many elves would have mistaken him for an expert wood carving than a living elf, spoke in a deep, creaking voice. How would we contribute to the safety and prosperity of this Terra, we have no great armies. The forest supplies our needs, and we make good trade in our wood and woodcrafts, but we are not wealthy. It is neither your resources nor your military prowess which you could contribute in particular, but your support and aid in general, came Ushara's smooth reply. The calamity that I see coming will require all to provide whatever support they can provide. A single elf warrior or mage may make the difference between success or failure in the struggle that is to come. In the more immediate terms, any support and resources you are able to provide would increase the strength of the Union as a whole. I'm not sure I could clearly support any alliance or membership in this Union until official terms are made, observed a third elder. Ushara nodded at this. You mistake me. I do not ask you to blindly sign an alliance here and now. I merely bring the offer for the process of negotiation to begin, and the people of Toronto to be thinking about what the future may bring. Unable to hold his tongue any longer, Valinar stood up, his gaze fixed firmly on Ushara, and said, If we do not join willingly, will we be forced to join your union? This stirred the members of the council. Some murmured similar opinions, some began to berate him for his bluntness, and Ushara, Tharas, and Targatha all simply stared at him. After what seemed like a long moment of commotion, Valinar continued, I do not beg your forgiveness, as I am putting forth a valid question. She talks of great danger, but she does not specify. She speaks of the necessity of uniting, but she talks of service. And if the unification of all kingdoms and peoples is so important to mutual survival, is it not possible that she would use force to accomplish her aims? Before any of the elves could say anything, Ushara, not taking her eyes off Valinar, responded, Valid points all, young elf, but allow me to defend my position. Firstly, I have no intention of coercing those who do not wish to join. Second, I speak of service because there is much work that needs to be done to prepare for the threat. Last, if you could see the future, you would know that it is impossible to see things in specifics. At this, it was Valinar who smiled. I too have the gift of foresight, and my visions are extremely specific. I would, in fact, say the greater danger to those who see what may be is interpreting the specific visions incorrectly. Upon saying this, Valinar once more witnessed Ushara's face expression flicker, quickly from surprise to anger before returning again to unreadable. Interesting. Your gift must function differently than mine. Before I leave tomorrow, I'd be interested in a private word with you regarding the site of what may be, was Ashara's reply in a calm tone. I will leave the council to its deliberations. You may give me your answer later. And with that, she finally broke her gaze with Valinar and swept from the room, robes billowing behind her. The first elder who questioned Ushara was the first to speak after she left. I agree with Mavara that I would wish to know specific terms, but this union has promise. Despite my urging, this council has refused to curb the continued encroachment of human settlements on the shores of the Gulf of Neletha on our southern border, and we have had to beat back a half dozen attempts in the last 3 centuries by various petty warlords to seize the western forest. Those warlords have been small enough threat, Oakar, observed one elder. And unless those settlers actually try to take land in the forest, is not worth the potential conflict with Camral, added another. Oakar thumped a clenched fist upon the table. They grow bolder every year, and neither they nor Camral have respect for the ancient treaties between us. What is more, if Camral joins this union before we do, we may lose the advantage of their aid in resolving this issue. Mavara rose from her chair and said, Oakar, I know your concerns about the humans who have begun to settle on the Gulf, especially since it is your clan that has felt the greatest effect. But let us not forget that if we join this union and we overestimate what they are capable of, the result may be the second time in my life that Toronto has burned at the hands of the armies of Kemral. This situation is wholly different, insisted Oakar with fire in his eyes. Is it? Replied Mavara. I was only a young soldier at the time, but my father's mother was on the council then, and she told us that Kemral cared little that our alliance with Astra Eel was made under duress, and that we offered to renounce it. We had still taken up arms against them, and our supposed allies were too far away, and despite their claims, not strong enough to help. And they were closer than this union is. Before Oakar could counter this argument, another elder chimed in. We have done well on our own. We see to our needs, and Kemral has a little interest in us as we in them. What is more, this threat Ushara speaks of sounds a deal too vague. I say we send their envoys back with a clear message to mind their own business as we shall mind ours. Your desire to wall off Turanu from the terror beyond is well known, Pethar, fumed Oakar. And why shouldn't we? Demanded Pethar, rising in anger, a slow process due to his age-bent body. It has been more than 2 centuries since we threw off the shackles of the treaty we signed in surrender to Kamral. What would we gain from signing over more of our resources to another distant realm? Oakar shook his head. What would we gain? We would gain the friendship of the rising power on this terra and the aid of their resources. With them as friends, we may not even need to stop at driving the human settlers from our borders. With their aid, perhaps we might even expand, for the first time in living memory, into the fertile yet independent lands to our west. Perhaps it will be we who are strong and Camral weak. Valinar was silent throughout this debate. There was a great deal more he wished to say, but with his youth and minding the warning his brother had given him, it was unlikely they would have welcomed his counsel, least of all the Ha'atha, who seemed clearly annoyed that his son's rude breaching of the etiquette of the council. From their words, he knew his concerns had been shared by several of the other elders regardless. Valinar was also less interested in the debate than he was in what Ushara had said and the visions he had been having. She did have a point. There seemed to be some great threat to the entire Terra that was looming on the horizon. But the nature of the calamity was beyond his comprehension. As the debate raged, Valinar also began to notice that feeling of deep, unnatural hatred grow even stronger as the normally docile elders grew even more heated. Theros waved down the clamor that was slowly building and said, I appreciate the thoughts of all that have spoken, and I welcome the debate to continue, but I would like to give my thoughts. After all were seated and all eyes fixed on the Ha'atha, Theras continued. I appreciate the concerns that Oakar has about human settlers on the Gulf and would be rulers to the west. And as things have gone, the time will soon come when the matter is addressed with Kamral. But Mavara is right to be concerned. We have not the numbers or the strength to contend with Kamral should the Union prove a poor check on their power, and I do not think even you, O Akar, wish to see the forest burned at their hands again. On the other hand, while we are self sufficient, I fear there is little wisdom in Pathar's recommendation that we flatly refuse the Telmaran Union. Once before, when I was a young man, we coldly refused the offer of alliance and mutual assistance given by the dark elves of Astraeel. The council felt as Pathar does now that we would gain little from participating in the Dark Elves' wars. They accepted our rejection at first, but just as Valinor fears will happen now, when the forces against them turned the tide and they needed help, they came with their armies, and they too burned part of the forest until the council swore allegiance on terms worse than for us. I therefore recommend a middle option, that we should politely refuse membership in their union at this time, but extend our hand in friendship and offer trade and goodwill, and say that we may consider our position in the future. After Tharas had said his piece, the debate continued much in this fashion for some time. It was late in the afternoon when the council reached a decision by a narrow majority that the elves of Toronto would regard the Union as friends, but for the moment would remain autonomous. It was also decided that preparations ought to be made, and soon, in case these dire warnings turned out to be true. Ushara and her guards were invited to join the elves in a feast that evening. If she had an opinion one way or another about the council's decision, she did not show it, and she neither spoke to Valinar during the feast nor even acknowledged his existence. He did the same. Seeking solitude, Valinar retired to his chamber as soon as he could politely do so, and for a time sat in his reclined chair, carefully carved to look like a leaf, and stared at nothing, contemplating all that had happened during the day. He was quite surprised when, after the sun had been down for some time, Ushara entered his chamber. Her face was far more expressive than it had been that morning, although it still bore the mark of a strong sense of superiority. "Am I interrupting, Prince?" began Ushara. "I wish to have a private word with you regarding your gift of seeing things that may be." Valinar stood and regarded her passively before responding. "No, you are not interrupting anything. What do you wish to ask me about?" "How long have you had such visions?" she inquired. "Are the visions in dreams or while waking? What do you have visions of?" "I have possessed the gift since childhood," began the reply. "And while the visions usually occur in dreams, I sometimes experience them while waking. As to what I have seen many things in my visions, but recently I see death and destruction by armored but shrouded beings. I see my family dying and the forest burning, and," here Valinar paused, with his own realization catching him by surprise, "and I see you." Ushara tensed noticeably at this and asked with genuine curiosity, "What about me?" Valinar's eyes narrowed as he pieced together the half remembered images from his latest dreams. "I see you laughing at the carnage around you. You are not seeking to stop the calamity, rather, you are its cause or its agent, or else are seeking to profit by these visions. This union of ours does not seek to unify and prepare, does it? It seeks to conquer and subdue." Ushara's voice remained calm as she asked, "Why did you not speak of such things at the council session?" "I only just now put the pieces together about my dreams and what you have said yourself," said Valinar. "Besides, I doubt any would have listened if I had. I am young and only at the council today because my father is the Ha'atha, and I am one of the few in all Tirana who has made study of the lands beyond the forest. Besides, as you clearly seem to notice, I am rather different from all the other elves of the forest, and they would likely have put it down to one of my odd mannerisms." At this, Ushara smiled, a smile full of both spite and cruel amusement. "It would have been no harm for the elves to be my enemies anyway. Most races would simply call it elven isolationism and self interest. But don't worry, you will be under my control eventually. I said that I would not coerce you. I said nothing about what the Union would do. You are safe enough for the moment, but we will return sooner than you will hope for." Valinar took a step forward. "I will stop you," he said. "I will not let this forest burn." The high, cold laughter Valinar heard in his nightmare pealed out as Ushara answered him mockingly. "Well, well, aren't you brave? Think of attacking me. It will do you no good." Taking another step forward, the elf said, "Go ahead, call your guards. They are no match for me." Laughing once more, Ashara looked into the elf's eyes and said after a moment, "Likely true, but I wasn't going to call my guards, and they aren't even outside." Bad choice," said the elf as he placed his hand upon the hunting knife hanging from his wall and attempted to draw it. It would not budge, and the handle started to grow hot. "I have no need of my guards, elfling, for it is you who are no match for me." Valinar concentrated and felt the spells holding his knife in its place and heating the weapon. He sensed the strands of array in the spell and tried to unwind them, but they were in a much more complex pattern than he expected, and every change he made was almost instantly undone. The knife was now almost unbearably hot, which was making concentration all the more difficult. But at last, with a great effort of will, he freed the knife from its sheath. You have some skill, Elfling, but you lack experience, said the woman as the knife suddenly became too hot to bear, forcing Valinar to let it go. He held his hand and wove a spell to ease the burn as the weapon crashed to the floor. He tried to move towards her again, but invisible ropes took hold of his limbs, chest, head, and neck, pinning him in place and lifting him off the ground. I wouldn't try to unravel that spell. Attempting to do so will either crush you to death or set off a whirlwind that will destroy your quaint little chamber and the tree we are in as well. Valinar, panting for breath from struggling with the invisible rope, said, I will stop you. Stop me? You don't even know what I'm planning or why. Even if you did, what chance do you think you have? I have been working towards my goal too long to be stopped so easily by anyone or anything, my little hero. Nevertheless, I will find a way. I will stop you killing. My dreams will not come true. How noble of you to want to save these puny creatures' lives. I don't know how you come to consider these elves family highborn that you are, or even how you exist at all, considering your race died out long ago on this terra. Forget these who are so far beneath you. Take my advice and save yourself by staying out of my way. With that, she raised her hand to his head. There was a purple flash, and he blacked out. That is the end of chapter one, A Deep, Unsettling Hatred. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, would like to see more content information, have any suggestions, I welcome them. Also, please like, share, subscribe, comment, all of that good stuff. I'd love to get some people listening to this, and certainly you can check out The Shadow of the Past on Amazon. The link for that is below, as well as my second book, And the Sun Burned Red, also available on Amazon, also linked below, as well as down below also are links to my socials, as well as my personal website and blog. I hope you had a good time listening to me reading the first chapter of my story, or my book, The Shadow of the Past. I will be picking up and starting with chapter 2 next week. I hope you all have a great day and get some either reading or writing or something creative you enjoy done. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you, and hope you have a good one.